The river is called Jabbok. It is not a famous river. It is not wide or deep or particularly beautiful. It cuts through the hills east of the Jordan, and on most nights, nobody is there. But on this particular night, a night that will be remembered for 3,000 years, a man strips off his sandals, sends his wives and his children and every possession he owns across to the other side, and stays behind, alone. He is not staying behind to pray. He is not staying behind to worship. He is staying behind because he is terrified. Tomorrow morning, he will face his brother Esau, the brother he cheated out of a birthright, the brother who swore to kill him, the brother who is now marching toward him with 400 men. And this man, this frightened, cunning, complicated man, is about to have the strangest night of his life. By morning, he will never walk the same way again. Stay with me. Because this is not just a story about one man at one river on one night. This is a story about what God does when he decides to change who you are. Not what you do, not where you live, who you are. And across the entire Bible, from a tent in Canaan to a prison in Egypt to a fishing boat on the Sea of Galilee, God does this again and again. He looks at a person, he sees something they cannot see in themselves, and then he calls them by a name they have never heard before. Today, we are going to look at every time that happened, and by the time we are done, you are going to understand something about your own name, your own identity, that you may have never considered before. Let's start at the beginning. Not the beginning of the Bible, the beginning of the story of a man who would become the father of more people than he could count. Though at the moment we meet him, he has exactly 0 children and is 99 years old. His name is Abram. That name, Abram, is not a small name. In the ancient Near East, names were not labels. They were declarations. Your name was your identity, your destiny, your place in the world. And Abram means exalted father. Avram, high father, noble father. He has carried that name his entire life. Into Ur of the Chaldeans, out of Haran, into Canaan, through Egypt, through wars and covenants and the long, aching years of waiting for a son who never came. Exalted father, no children. You can imagine what that name felt like to carry. Every time someone called it across a marketplace, every time his wife Sarai heard it spoken in a tent, Avram, high father, the name that reminded him daily of everything God had promised and nothing God had yet delivered. And then, in Genesis chapter 17, God appears, and he says something extraordinary. He says, that is not your name anymore. The Hebrew word for what God does here is Natan. He gives. God gives Abram a new name, not because Abram has earned it, not because the promise has been fulfilled, but because God is declaring the end from the beginning, calling into existence things that do not yet exist, as Paul will write centuries later. The new name is Abraham, Avraham, father of a multitude. He still has no children. He is 99 years old. His wife is 90. And God hands him a name that means he will have more descendants than he can number. Here's what most people miss. The name change does not come after the miracle. It comes before. God renames Abraham while he is still waiting, while the promise is still invisible, while nothing has changed except the name on his lips when he wakes up every morning. That is not coincidence. That is the pattern. And Sarai becomes Sarah in the same breath, a detail that gets buried under Abraham's story, but deserves to stand on its own. Sarai and Sarah are not dramatically different words. Both mean princess, more or less, but the shift matters. The letter Hey, The same letter added to Abram's name to make Abraham is inserted into Sarai to make Sarah. Rabbinical scholars have argued for centuries that this letter Hey is more than linguistic. It is the breath sound, the sound God makes when he speaks, as if God is breathing himself into their names, into their identities. Sarah is 90 years old. She laughed when she heard she would have a son. She laughed, and then she lied about laughing, and God said, "No, you laughed." And still, he changes her name. Still, he breathes into her a new identity. She will hold her son within the year. Now we come back to the river. It is midnight at Jabbok, and the man who will become Israel is alone in the dark. You need to understand who Jacob is before you can understand what is about to happen to him. Jacob is not a simple man. He is not a good man, not in the clean, uncomplicated way we use that word. He came out of the womb grabbing his twin brother's heel, and the Hebrew word for that is akev, heel grabber, deceiver, the one who trips you from behind. His mother loved him more than his brother. His father preferred Esau. And Jacob, brilliant, calculating Jacob, spent his life using his intelligence to take what he could not earn. He tricked his starving brother into selling his birthright for a bowl of soup. He dressed in goat skin to fool his blind, dying father into giving him the wrong blessing. He ran from Esau's fury for 20 years, built a family, built wealth, built a life, and now he is running again, or trying to, except this time there's nowhere to run to. Esau is in front of him. The wilderness is behind him. The river is beside him. And someone steps out of the dark. The text in Genesis 32 is careful with its language. It says, a man wrestled with him until the breaking of the day. Just a man. No introduction, no explanation. Jacob does not know who this is. He only knows that he will not let go, that whatever this fight costs him, he will not surrender. Pay attention to this. Jacob has spent his entire life winning through deception, through cleverness, through running. But here, in the dark, with his back against the river and his brother's army a field away, here, for the first time in his life, Jacob fights honestly, openly, with nothing but his hands and his will. And he does not win. Not exactly. The figure touches the socket of Jacob's hip. One touch, and the joint gives way. Jacob is broken. He is limping in pain, holding on to someone he cannot see in a night that will not end. And still he does not let go. The figure says, "Let me go, for the day is breaking." And Jacob, broken Jacob, limping Jacob, terrified and exhausted Jacob, says something that will echo across every page of the Bible that follows. He says, "I will not let you go unless you bless me, not unless you heal me, not unless you fix what you just broke, unless you bless me." And then the figure asks a question that seems too simple to be significant. What is your name? You have to hear what this question really is, because God, and by this point in the story, you understand this is God. God already knows his name. This is not a request for information. This is an invitation to confession. What is your name? Who are you really? What have you been carrying all these years? And Jacob answers honestly, perhaps for the first time. Yaakov, heel grabber, deceiver. That is who I am. And God says, not anymore. The new name is Yisrael, Israel. And it does not mean what you might expect. It does not mean chosen one or beloved or favored. The Hebrew breaks down like this: Sarah, to struggle or persist, and El, God. Israel means one who wrestles with God, one who struggles with the divine and does not let go. God renames Jacob after his worst moment and his best moment simultaneously. The limp and the persistence, the brokenness and the refusal to release. Here's the part nobody tells you. Jacob walks away from that river with a permanent limp. The text is specific. He limped on his hip because the socket had been touched. For the rest of his life, every step he takes is a reminder of the night he met God in the dark. Every morning when he rises, every mile he walks, every time his grandchildren watch him cross a room, they see the limp. And that limp is not a punishment. It is proof. It is the mark of a man who held on to God until morning came. Now, two more name changes that happen in the shadow of these larger ones, but deserve your attention. The first is Joseph. Joseph is Jacob's son, Israel's son, which is the point. He is 17 years old when his brothers, eaten alive by jealousy, sell him to slave traders heading to Egypt. He spends years in slavery, years in prison, years in a foreign country where nobody knows his name, his father, his God. And then Pharaoh has a dream nobody can interpret. And Joseph, by the power of God, reads it. 7 years of plenty, 7 years of famine, store the grain, save the world. Pharaoh is so stunned that he promotes Joseph on the spot, from prison to second in command of Egypt in a single conversation. And then he gives Joseph a new name, Zaphanath-Paneah. Scholars debate the exact translation. Some say it means revealer of secrets. Others say God speaks and he lives. But here is what nobody debates. It is an Egyptian name, completely Egyptian, given by a pagan king. On the surface, it looks like erasure, like Joseph's Hebrew identity being buried under an Egyptian title. But Joseph keeps his Hebrew name too. And when his brothers come to Egypt starving, when the famine drives them to bow before the man they sold, he recognizes them immediately. He weeps in a private room before he can compose himself. And when he finally reveals himself, he does not say, I am Zaphanath-Paneah. He says, I am Joseph, your brother. The Egyptian name was a position. The Hebrew name was his soul. God let him carry both, because sometimes your calling requires you to operate in a world that does not know your God, but your identity is never what the world names you. The second is Hosea becoming Joshua, and it is easy to miss because it happens in a single verse. Numbers 13, verse 16, Moses is sending 12 spies into Canaan. He looks at the young man from the tribe of Ephraim, a man named Hosea, which means salvation, and he adds a syllable, Yah, the short form of Yahweh, the name of God. Hosea becomes Yehoshua, Joshua. Yahweh saves. Moses does not explain why. The text does not slow down for it. But think about what Moses is doing. He is sending these men into a land of giants and walled cities and armies that will make 10 of the 12 spies come back trembling. He is sending them on a mission most of them will fail. And before they go, he looks at one young man and breathes God's name into his. Joshua will be one of 2 spies who comes back with faith instead of fear. He will lead Israel into the land Moses never enters. He will be the one who looks at giants and says, they are bread for us. His name told him who he was before the battle began. We move now to the New Testament, to a fishing dock on the Sea of Galilee, to a man who smells like fish and salt water and has probably never thought deeply about his name in his life. His name is Simon. Simon is a common name. In first century Jewish culture, it is one of the most common names a Jewish boy could be given. The Greek form of the Hebrew Simeon, second son of Jacob, one of the 12 tribes. It is not a remarkable name. it carries no special weight. Simon is a fisherman. He works with his hands. He is loud. You will see that in every account of his life. He speaks before he thinks. He acts before he plans. He is the kind of man who, when a storm hits on the water, does not quietly pray. He panics visibly and wakes up whoever is sleeping. He is also, under all of that noise, deeply loyal, ferociously so. The kind of man who means every word he says, which means he is also capable of great failure, because the people who mean things most deeply are the same people who feel the crash of their own betrayal most completely. But that is later. Right now, Simon is being introduced to a rabbi from Nazareth. His brother Andrew has brought him, and Jesus looks at him, looks at this loud, ordinary fisherman with his common name and his calloused hands, and says something nobody expected. He says, "You are Simon, son of John. You will be called Cephas." In Greek, Petros. In English, Peter, the rock. Simon has not done anything yet. He has not preached a sermon. He has not healed anyone. He has not walked on water or cut off a soldier's ear or wept bitterly in a courtyard. None of that has happened. Jesus looks at him at the beginning, at the raw, unformed, unremarkable beginning, and gives him the name he will have to grow into. This is the pattern again. God does not rename you after you become who he made you to be. He renames you so that you can become it. The name is not a reward. The name is a road. Josephus, the first century Jewish historian, writes about the early followers of Jesus with a kind of detached scholarly interest, noting that the movement continued even after the execution of its leader. The historical record of Peter's leadership in Jerusalem is documented across multiple early sources, including Eusebius of Caesarea, who in his ecclesiastical history records Peter as the foundational leader of the church in the decades after the resurrection. The rock held eventually, but not before the cracking. You know what happens. The night of Jesus' arrest, Peter follows at a distance, which is already the beginning of the problem. He ends up in the courtyard of the high priest. A servant girl looks at him in the firelight and says, "You were with him." And Peter, loud, loyal, ferocious Peter, says, "I do not know the man," 3 times. Before the rooster crows, 3 denials. And then Peter goes outside and weeps bitterly. Here is what I want you to notice. This is the man Jesus named the rock. And now I want you to remember Jacob at the river, broken, limping, holding on in the dark, not because he was strong, but because he refused to let go. God named him Israel, one who wrestles with God, not because he won the fight, but because he would not release his grip even when the night seemed to have no end. Peter releases his grip. In the courtyard, in the firelight, with the accusation hanging in the cold air, Peter lets go, and the rooster crows. And the look on Jesus' face across that courtyard, Luke records it, just 1 verse, almost unbearable in its brevity. Jesus turned and looked at Peter. That look, you know what it cost Peter to receive that look. You know, because you have been in courtyards of your own. You have said things in the cold and the fear that you cannot unsay. And the worst part is not the guilt. The worst part is the memory of who you were supposed to be. Peter weeps bitterly. And then he goes back to his boat, back to his nets, back to the Sea of Galilee, back to Simon the fisherman, as if the last 3 years were a dream he woke up from. But the name does not go away. After the resurrection, Jesus finds him on the beach. There's a charcoal fire, the same word used for the charcoal fire in the courtyard where Peter denied him. John records this deliberately. Jesus is not avoiding the wound. He is going straight to it. 3 times. Once for each denial, he asks, Simon, do you love me? Not Peter. Simon, the old name, as if Jesus is meeting him where he actually is, not where he is supposed to be. And 3 times, Simon says yes. And 3 times, Jesus says, feed my sheep. And when it is over, Simon is Peter again. The rock with the cracks showing. The rock with a history. The rock with a story that makes him useful to every broken person who will ever hear it. Now, the strangest name change of all, because Saul becoming Paul is almost invisible. And that invisibility is the point. Saul of Tarsus is introduced in the book of Acts as a young man standing at the edge of a crowd, watching coats piled at his feet while Stephen, the first Christian martyr, is stoned to death. He does not throw the stones, he just approves. The text says he approved of his execution. 1 sentence, cold. Then Saul begins to destroy the church. That is the word Acts uses, destroy. He goes house to house. He drags men and women to prison. He is educated, brilliant, theologically precise, and completely certain that he is doing the will of God by eliminating these people who follow the crucified rabbi from Nazareth. He is heading to Damascus to continue the work when the light hits. Not a gentle light, not a warm glow, a light from heaven that knocks him off his feet, and everyone traveling with him falls too, though only Saul hears the voice. He is blind for 3 days. He does not eat, he does not drink. He sits in darkness in a house on a street called Straight, and he waits. A man named Ananias, one of the very believers Saul came to Damascus to arrest, is sent by God to find him. Ananias argues, Lord, I have heard about this man. I know what he has done to your people in Jerusalem. And God says, go, because I will show him how much he must suffer for my name. Not how much he will achieve, how much he will suffer. Ananias goes. He finds Saul. He puts his hands on him and calls him, and this is worth noting, brother. The man who came to Damascus as a hunter becomes a brother in the space of a single word. Saul's sight returns. He is baptized. He eats. And now, here is what most people miss about the name change. It does not happen on the Damascus road. It does not happen in Ananias' house. It does not happen at his baptism or his commissioning or any of the dramatic moments you might expect. The first time the text uses the name Paul is Acts 13, verse 9. Quietly, almost without announcement, Saul, who was also called Paul, he is in Cyprus. He is confronting a false prophet who is trying to turn a Roman official away from the faith. And in that moment of confrontation, filled with the Holy Spirit, the text says, he is Paul, the Greek name for the Roman world. Saul was the Hebrew name. Paul is the name he carries into every city that has never heard of the God of Israel, into Athens and Corinth and Ephesus and Rome itself. His Hebrew name was Shaul, asked for, requested. Paul shares that name not in a dramatic moment, but in the middle of the work, as if the name change happens not in a single instant, but across years of becoming. The smallest name change in the Bible, the quietest, and yet the letters this man writes under this new name will shape the theology of 2,000 years of Christianity. Now watch what happens when you hold all of these together. Abram, the childless man, becomes Abraham, father of multitudes, before a single child is born. Sarai becomes Sarah with the breath of God in her name. Jacob, the deceiver, becomes Israel the wrestler, not despite his brokenness, but through it. Joseph holds his Hebrew name in an Egyptian palace. Hosea becomes Joshua before the war begins. Simon becomes Peter before he earns it. Saul becomes Paul in the middle of the work. Do you see the pattern? Every single name change in this list happens before the person fully becomes what the name declares. The name is never the graduation certificate. The name is the enrollment form. God renames people at the beginning of a process, not the end. He calls you what you are becoming before you believe it yourself. Go back to the river one more time. Jacob limps away from Jabbok at sunrise. The text says the sun rose on him as he crossed over. After the longest night of his life, after the wrestling, the breaking, the renaming, the sun rises. He is not the same man who sat down on that riverbank in the dark. He carries a new name and a permanent limp and something else. Something the text does not name directly, but that you can feel in every chapter that follows. He carries proof that God was in the dark with him. The limp is not incidental. For the rest of his life, through the grief of losing Joseph, through the famine, through the long journey to Egypt in his old age, Jacob walks with a limp that tells everyone who sees him, this man met God and held on. This man was broken and did not let go. Now think about Peter on the beach. Jesus meets him at a charcoal fire. The same smell, the same warmth, the same setting as the courtyard where Peter denied him. Jesus does not avoid the parallel. He walks straight into it. 3 questions for 3 denials. And at the end, he says something that is one of the most striking things Jesus says to anyone in all 4 Gospels. He says, when you were young, you used to dress yourself and walk wherever you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will dress you and carry you where you do not want to go. John adds, this he said to show by what kind of death he was to glorify God. Peter the rock will die on a cross. Eusebius of Caesarea records that Peter was crucified upside down in Rome under Nero because he said he was not worthy to die in the same position as his Lord. The man who could not admit to a servant girl that he knew Jesus dies, declaring, with his body, who Jesus is. The denier becomes the martyr. The man who let go becomes the man who holds on until the end. Jacob's limp, Peter's cross. Here is what these 2 men share. Separated by 1,500 years of history, by language, by culture, by everything except this. They were both renamed by God in their worst moment, not their best, their worst. Jacob at the river, running from his brother, terrified, exhausted. Peter in the courtyard, cold, afraid, the worst version of himself. And God, in both cases, does not wait for them to become worthy of the name before he gives it. This is the part that should stop you if you let it, because you have a name too, not just the one your parents gave you. You have names that have been spoken over you in your worst moments, by failure, by grief, by the voice in your own head at 3 a.m, broken, worthless, too far gone, disqualified, and the same God who stood at the Jabbok and breathed into a frightened man's name. The same God who looked across a courtyard at a weeping fisherman. That God looks at you and says, that is not your name. You do not know yet what the new name is. Jacob did not know what Israel would mean for the nation that would come from him. Peter did not know that his name would be the first name listed in every account of the disciples. The name the early church would build its memory on. The name that would be carved in stone across 2,000 years of Christian history. You do not know what your name will mean when the whole story is told, but here is what you can know. The renaming does not happen after you get it right. It happens in the dark, at the river, by the charcoal fire, in the middle of the mess That is where God does his best naming. So here is what we have seen. God renames Abraham and Sarah before they have a child. He renames Jacob after he breaks him. He preserves Joseph's name through Egyptian erasure. He adds his own name to Hosea before the battle. He renames Peter before he earns it. He renames Paul quietly in the middle of the work without ceremony. And every single one of these people, everyone, goes through a period where the new name feels like a lie. Abraham spends years as a childless man called father of multitudes. Jacob limps on his new name for decades. Peter carries the word rock while the memory of a courtyard fire still burns in his chest. The name comes before the reality. Three things to take with you. The first is this. The names spoken over you in your worst moments are not God's verdict. Jacob's own choices confirmed the name heel grabber for 20 years. But that was not the end of his name. The names that failure and fear in other people have given you, those names have an expiration date. They are not the final word. The second is this. God renames people at the beginning of the process, not the end. If you are waiting to feel worthy of who God says you are before you act like it, you have the order backwards. Abraham walked out of his tent the morning after his renaming and started living as a different man. Before the child, before the proof, the name changes first and the life follows. The third is this, and this is the one to carry the longest. God renamed Jacob not despite the limp, but through it. The brokenness was not an obstacle to the blessing. It was the location of it. The place where Jacob was most broken was the exact place where God showed up and gave him the name that would define a nation. Your limp is not disqualifying you. It is marking you. It is proof that you were in the dark and you held on. The sun will rise on you too. And on that morning, when the light comes and the night is finally over, you will walk differently than you walked before. Everyone will be able to see it. You will carry the mark of a person who met God in the worst of it and did not let go. That is not a wound. That is a testimony. Go carry your name.